Hello and a really big warm welcome to this presentation from the Urban Penguin. My name is Andrew Mallett, and in today's presentation we're going to take a look at the Puppet Bolt secure shell client. Now this then can be used to manage agentless machines, so machines that don't have the Puppet agent, or maybe even machines that cannot have the Puppet agent for whatever reason, be it resources or be it security reasons. But we're going to see how we can still manage those systems. We'll be installing the Puppet Bolt utility on an Ubuntu system, but it won't have anything to do with Puppet. So it's not a Puppet server, it doesn't have the Puppet agent, and we can use it completely independently of our normal Puppet infrastructure. As a demonstration though, we're going to see how we can use Puppet Bolt to reach out to two other systems. One is Ubuntu, one is Rocky Linux, and we're going to be installing the Puppet agent onto those systems. We can then see that those systems connect into our Puppet server and can pick up then any configuration that we want to continue to manage on those devices. So it's just showing a practical usage for where we might be using Puppet Bolt, but some of the strength of Puppet Bolt as well. So come on, let's find that command line. And here we are working at the command line of my Ubuntu system. This doesn't have our Puppet agent installed, it doesn't have the Puppet server, it's just an Ubuntu 2004 system. So we should be able to get ourselves up and running. The first thing that we need to be able to do is just ensure that we are working in our home directory. This just makes it clear to everybody where we're working on a system. And I'm working as a standard user, the user Tux. The next thing that we want to do is add in our Puppet repositories. From the Puppet repositories, we're going to be installing Puppet Bolt, the secure shell, the SSH client that we can use then to manage our systems that we can connect to via SSH. So we're going to go through and just download the file. So you can see here that we're using wget, and we've got the URL through to our Puppet tools release and bionic.dev. So we've brought that down, and of course it's come down into our home directory. If we go through and do a listing, we can see there that it's sitting there in all of its glory in its red compressed format. We're then going to go through and install it. So we need to elevate our privileges, and we can use dpkg, and we can go through then and add in the install, and then we can tab complete on the Debian file. We can run ahead and install that, and the main thing that that does is actually add in the Puppet repo for us, but it will also have some of the signing keys. Now that we've added in the repo to install software from, we can go through and do our apt update. And we can see that we have our app.puppet.com repository, so we can make sure that we're up to date on all of our repository information. I'm just going to clear the screen, and we're going to go through then and run our sudo and apt install Puppet Bolt. So we're not putting on a Puppet server, we're not putting on a Puppet agent, we're still an unmanaged system, and all we're doing is putting on essentially an SSH client. But we'll see some of the goodies that this can do for us. So as we then go through, we can run through our installation, and we can allow that to run through. Once it has installed, we can create ourselves a project directory. I'm going to clear the screen. I'm just going to call mukta my project. And then we can move into that directory. Now that we're into that directory, we can create ourselves a project within this. If I do an ls-a, of course, we've got nothing other than the standard dot and dot files. So it's empty. We've just created a brand new directory. What else would you really think? But if I go through now and using Bolt, and remember I said this has lots of goodies involved into it, so it's not just an SSH client. We can run through and use our Bolt and then project init, and then we call the directory my project. So we can go through and we've created the project now. And if I do an ls-l and a, clear the screen, you can see that it's already added in a .gitignore file, so it's expecting us to be able to synchronize this through to a Git repository. Now, we don't have to, but it sets it up for us. It's created the bolt project.yaml, and it's created the inventory YAML. Now, the project YAML will have information about our project. The inventory will have a list of hosts that we want to connect to and any of the properties that we want to work with those. So that's the first thing that we're going to take a look at, is working with our inventory. I'm going to go through and open up the inventory file. So if I just use Vim, but remember, we can use any text editor that we wanted to. So it gives us an example. It's obviously all commented, but we could go through and we could work with this. I'm going to put in my own example. So I'm just going to delete everything, and then we can go through and paste in just an example I've got. Now I have to make some changes to this because say this is just my example, but we've got our targets. I want to make sure that I can connect through to my Rocky system, and I'm just calling that Rocky, but we could also call it Rocky Agent if we want. We won't be connecting through to our local system, so I can go through then and have that as Ubuntu, and we can call this Ubuntu. We don't have to have an alias, but it just gives us different names that we can access it with. They can go into a group, which I'm calling Linux, and then obviously we just make sure that everything matches. So that's going to be then our agent. So I've got those host entries for Rocky and Ubuntu already in place. As we look at the configuration for SSH, we're saying don't worry about the host key check. So we'll download it automatically. I'm not using key-based authentication, but obviously key-based authentication would be better. So we're using password-based authentication and the user that I want to connect as. But now if I just go through and save this, we're getting ourselves pretty much up and running. I can go through and use my bolt and inventory show to display that inventory. So we can see the two targets, we can see where we're reading it from. It doesn't show me the group, but if I clear the screen and just move that back up again and do -- detail, then we can obviously see more details, and it's going to include the groups. And we've got a built-in group called all, as well as the group called Linux. So I can clear the screen. And if we want to see how this could work, if I go through then and run bolt and just run a command, and let's specify the command we want to run, we'll just run, let's say, who am I? I don't have to worry about quoting it because there are no spaces or anything like that. But obviously we had command with arguments and options, I'd need to quote it. And we can then target our Linux systems. And then as we go through and execute, and I haven't connected via SSH to these systems before, so I don't have their public keys. But remember, we're ignoring that part of SSH and we're accepting them automatically. And then as we run through, we can see then that we're getting responses coming back from Rocky and Ubuntu. If we needed to elevate our privileges to carry out certain things, we can also go through and put -- run as space root. Then as we then go through and see the output now, we can see then that we have elevated to root, and it's the user root showing rather than the user tux that I'm using to authenticate. Now, obviously, we need the right of tux to be able to elevate through sudo, but we can then do this automatically through the run as. Now, obviously, commands are okay, but we don't necessarily want to try and run all of the commands. And some of the commands could be different that we would perhaps need between, let's say, a Rocky system and an Ubuntu system. Remember, one of the things I'm saying that we could do with this is to go through and install the agent. We need to add in the correct repository. So, of course, that is going to be different. It's going to be a completely different repository and different commands to add the repositories on our different systems. But also, when we're installing software, the package managers are also going to be different. So we've got all of these differences to be able to deal with. And that's where then Puppet really comes in with Bolt. Now let me just clear the screen with Control and L, and we can look at the next level up from our commands. So the commands are okay, but obviously it's going to get a little complex trying to manage everything. If we go through and use our Bolt task and show, we can see the default tasks that are supplied with Bolt. Now, these tasks can be really useful to us. One of the ones that I can see that we can use straight away is the service task. Now, this has then a level of, I suppose, control built into it, is that it can deal with the target operating system and it knows then how to deal with the service based on the type of operating system that it is. The same way as I'm looking at the package task, it would know how to install software. So let me clear the screen again. And if we go through and want to look at a little bit of detail, we can go in and say, look at the service task. So this then gives me the usage instruction. So we know how we can use it. And then I can just go through then, I'll just keep it up so we can see then the instruction there, but we've got then our task run service. We can then target our Linux systems. And of course we have to specify any parameters that we want for our service. So then action equals, and we'll just get a status. So if I go through and have status, and we can then have the name of our service, and we'll have SSHD. I can move that to the top if it's easier to see. But now as I run through, we don't need to run this as root. We can get the basic status as a standard user. We should be able to see then the status of our service on both the Ubuntu and Rocky systems. So this is then starting to get quite good, and obviously I can read the information back, and then perhaps I can create reports on those where the service is disabled. I think you have to ignore SSHD because we're connecting over SSH, so we know that it is enabled. But it's the standard server that I could service that I could query on both systems. So that's purely why I'm using it. The next step up from tasks are plans. And we can go through and list our plans. So we can go through and use a bolt, plan, and show. And once it thought about it for a little moment, of course, it prints out the available plans that we have on our system. And these are all by default part of our build and provided with the Puppet Bolt package itself. Obviously, we haven't created any, but we can create our own. The idea of a plan is it can combine together commands, tasks, and maybe even other plans. We're going to have to do a little bit of work to get this up and running, though. Not too much work, so don't be too concerned about it. But we can see the module path. We're looking in the project directory for the modules or .modules directory. If we've installed something from Forge, we'll probably go into the .modules directory. But if we're doing something ourselves, we'll probably just put it into the modules directory. So we can do a we'll do -p because we're going to create some subdirectories. Modules. And then we'll create a module, we're going to call it agent. And then we can go through and specify our plans. So that's the plan that we're going to create. And then we're going to have a file subdirectory for maybe scripts or anything else that we want to deliver with it. And then we can go through and close that off. If I now go through and just take a look at what we've done, so tree and modules, we can see then that we've created the top level directory modules, the agent module directory below that, and then two subdirectories, files and plans. And again, I've just gone through and cleared my screen just to give ourselves a little bit of real estate and fresh air to look at when we're working at the command line. And we're going to add in a file to begin with. So I'm going to use my favorite text editor. You can use any text editor that you want. And we can then navigate down into our modules and then the agent directory and then the file subdirectory that we created. We're going to be creating then a file that we're going to call hosts.sh, just a bash shell script. Obviously, the name can be called anything, but we're going to make a reference to this from our plan. So the files are ancillary files, whether they're scripts or files that are going to be delivered to the system. And I'm just going to then go through and paste this in. And let's go through and just set the background so we get a better view of the syntax. So we can have then our background equals dark. And we can see then we've got a simple if statement where we're searching for Puppet in our hosts. If we don't have a Puppet entry inside of our host file, then we're going to add it. And I'm adding in the IP address of my Puppet server. Now, we don't have DNS in my lab environment. You obviously might have DNS. But for Puppet agents, they have to be able to locate the Puppet server. And remember, the whole idea of this is we're looking at being able to automate the install of our Puppet agent. So we're going to make sure that the host entry is there. Once we're ready in that, though, I'm just going to go through and save it. I don't need to make it executable or anything like that. And now we're on to creating our plan. So again, I'm going to go through and navigate into, you've guessed it this time, the plans directory. And then I give the plan a name. So the plan will have a name of install. And it has to have a .yaml extension. Has to be YAML, it can't be YML. Has to be the 4-letter extension or suffix. Let me just grab my sample YAML file. And then I can go through and copy and paste this in. When we look at line 1, well, we're just obviously setting the description. We can set then the parameters. Now, we don't really need to pass parameters through to this plan, but we just have the default of targets. And if we don't provide a target, we can default to the local host. Importantly here, we've got steps, and we've got 3 steps. When we take a look, the first one is a script, and it's running then agent and host.sh. Now, we don't specify the files directory. It automatically looks in the files directory. Again, it's going to run against our targets, the install, and it's looking at the Puppet agent install task that comes as standard as part of our build of Puppet Bolt. Now, Puppet Bolt has nothing really to do with Puppet, but obviously with Puppet owning Puppet Bolt, it kind of makes sense they give this easy push way of installing the agent. Again, who we're targeting. The final thing then is making sure that the Puppet service is started. Again, I could use the service task that we saw before, but I can also then go through and actually run Puppet. Now that the agent is installed, we can actually go through and run the Puppet agent itself. Looking at our resource, a resource being a service, a service name, which is Puppet, and then we can go through and ensure that it's running and ensure that it's enabled. So running now and enabled so it starts on future boots. So we've got one plan. The plan is named after the YAML file. So it's install. The module it's created in is agent. So we're going to reference it as agent : install. Inside of the plan that we've created, we've got 3 separate steps. One runs a script, one runs a task, and then one runs a command. Once we're happy with that, we can go through and save it. And again, still working in the root of my project, we can check then what we've got by looking at tree and modules again. So you can see now that we've got one plan. I can have multiple plans for that module agent. We've got one file, and that's our script. If I go back and look at my bolt plan show, we can see now that we've got the agent install being listed. It's sorted in alphabetical order, so it happens to be at the top, but that's only because agent then is first alphabetically out of what we've got. But it's listed as the module name, separated then from the plan name. Now we can put all of this together, and if I go through and clear my screen, and we can go through and run our plan, run, and then agent install. So this does all of the heavy lifting of making sure that we've got a Puppet entry, making sure that the agent is installed, and making sure that the agent is started. Remember, this is running on different operating systems, the Rocky Linux operating system and an Ubuntu system. We can go through then and run -t, so we are providing our targets for our Linux group, and then -- run as root. With that done, let's hit the big enter key. And we can see then that it's running away, so it's already executed the script. Obviously, that's going to be the relatively easy element to run. When we're adding in the agent, it's going to have to add in the Puppet Labs repository for Red Hat Enterprise Linux on the Red Hat system. It needs to add it in for Debian-based systems on the Ubuntu system. And obviously then it's got to install the agents. And now then it's made sure that the agents are up and running. Now, we were only going to 2 machines, but we can see then the advantages it's giving me without having to have any agents on the remote system. And we can see then that we've been able to carry out quite a lot quite quickly. But let's now take a look on our Puppet server to see if those agents then have connected. So if I go through then and run SSH tux at Puppet, we can connect into that system, add in then my password, and let's gain root privileges here. Now with this done, I can go through then and run my Puppet server, CA list, and we can see then that we've got 2 certificate requests coming in from the Rocky system and the Ubuntu system. So we then have to just sign these. So we can then go through and run sign -- cert name and pick up for our Ubuntu system. And then, of course, there is a sign all, so I could go through and sign everything. But the idea is we're now giving rights through to our Puppet server. So we probably want to take a little bit of care over this. But now those systems are up and running. And we can see then how relatively easy it was to get those up and running. The Puppet Bolt can be used for other things. It doesn't have to deploy the agent, but that's a good demonstration because it does so much. If we want to check our agent versions, then again, I can jump out, move back to my Bolt system, and one final demonstration, if we go through back and list our tasks, so if I use them Bolt task show, one of our tasks then is going to be able to list the version of agents that we've got. So I can then go through and do my task run and then puppet underscore agent colon and version. Move that just to the top, and then we can target our Linux inventory group. So we can see then that we have got the latest and greatest, and we can see then that it is the true Puppet Labs version, as the version file is coming back from opt Puppet Labs Puppet and version.
All that is left to say is thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this, then you are probably sadder than I first thought. For more of this drivel, please subscribe, like and comment to @TheUrbanPenguin.